Gen Z right now is engaging in running earlier than any other generation in the history of fitness. And we have data that shows, for Gen X, for millennials, for boomers, they started running when they got into high school, cross country and track. What we're seeing with Gen Z is they started at age 11. Because think about it, in COVID, you're at home, your parents are going out for a run or walk, so you're going to join just to get out of the house. And so we have a wave of a generation coming that we're pretty excited about, and we're seeing it around the world.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Leadership Next, the podcast about the people
and trends
that are shaping the future of business. I'm Diane Brady.
And I'm Kristen Stoller.
Kristen, are you a runner?
I am not. In fact, I can't bring myself to do it, but I Peloton.
Yeah, I'm not a runner either, but I actually got very intrigued by running after our conversation with Dan Sheridan, the CEO of Brooks Running Shoes, which I think of as a cult brand for people who really like to run, like Phil Waba, who interviewed him on stage at our COO.
That's where we had Dan and did this interview. We were at our COO Summit, Scottsdale, Arizona. Our colleague Phil Waba interviewed him on stage and had a great conversation. And I chatted with him this morning because I was like, what was your favorite part? Because he loves the conference. And he said he loved that Dan said, we are mostly footwear, and that's what we've been historically. But now we have permission from customers to expand and get into new areas, fashion being one of them, athleisure.
Yeah.
Made popular
how
by
do
the
you
pandemic.
Get permission from your customers? So this is what's also fascinating about Dan, I found, is here's a guy who started as a field rep, 26 years in one company.
Yeah.
He's now, of course, CEO. And really, it is a brand that has been almost religiously focused on people who run, who care about the technical aspects. So why this pivot point and why now you're able to expand into a lot of different areas into this whole generation athleisure, as you mentioned. I think that's going to be interesting.
Yeah. My thought is that now running is such a cultural phenomenon where it used to not be. We have the Strava app. Mm-hmm. People are using Strava like it's social media. So running is super popular.
You want a date, get on those running shoes, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So many dating running clubs in New York. And Dan, also just the most jovial guy I think we've ever talked to.
Lots of great stories.
We met him in Seattle.
We're not going to judge yet most jovial. We'll appoint that at the end of the year when we do our wrap up, I'm sure, our awards ceremony. But I do love the culture that he's created, the messy Mondays, et cetera. So I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned in how do you create an incredibly engaged culture and expand. Let's not forget that other companies like Nike have been struggling because of tariffs. So these politics writ large is really impacting companies like Brooks, and we did talk about that as well.
And speaking of Nike, just going up against such a giant as Nike, that's his big competition. That's hard.
Yep. Well, I will say, Phil, as I said, our resident runner on staff was very excited to have Brooks. No better for him. And I was very excited to talk to him. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Me too. All right. Well, let's roll tape.
Cities are home to the majority of the world's population and account for 80% of global GDP. That makes the health and sustainability of our cities critical to creating a prosperous future. And of course, business has a role to play. Jason Gerzadis, the CEO of Deloitte US, is the sponsor of this podcast, and he joins us now. Jason, great to see you.
Great to see you, Diane. Thanks for having me.
So how should businesses play a role in creating more vibrant and sustainable cities?
It's clear to me that the health of cities is inextricably linked to businesses' viability and success. I think it starts with an awareness or a recognition of that mutually dependent reality. I think the how is around collaboration. It's bringing to bear the capabilities of businesses to support cities, renewal and innovation, to understand the criticality of cities' role around economic prosperity, innovation, as well as cultural exchange.
Jason, could you give us some examples of successful urban transformation projects that have been driven by these innovative business practices?
I'm proud to say that Deloitte, back in 2023, we've started an effort called YesSF here in San Francisco, where I live. The launch of YesSF with other business collaborators has brought together our competencies around stimulating interest amongst innovators to bring sustainability and technology innovation to benefit the city itself.
Excellent. Well, that sounds like a very cool project. Thank you so much for sharing it with us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jason.
Dan, we're here at the COO Summit in Scottsdale. You just had really great conversation with our colleague Phil Waba. And I love how you talk about Brooks Running and the niche that it occupied and where it's going now.
Yeah. Well, so, I think the right way to talk about Brooks is we're a global brand. We sell in over 50 countries around the world. We're the number one brand here in the US in performance run. And that's been a journey. It's not an accident.
So niche is cruel. Is that a cruel way? Forgive me.
I won't take offense to it.
You're a mass market brand. Let me correct myself.
We are a performance run brand at the root of everything we do. So every day we get up, there's 1,300 of us at Brooks that simply think about running, the run culture, runners, and their journey in life and health and wellness. And that focus, we often say sharp focus creates mass appeal, is inviting many people into this brand that choose an active life. And we love to say that if you put one foot in front of the other, you're our customer. And we've been able to
walking's
execute.
Okay.
Yeah. I think for anyone that health and wellness is a part of their life. Many of us get up in the morning, we think about a few things. I think about coffee, and then I think about moving and moving our bodies. And so our sharp focus on performance run has a big tent to invite many people in, because more people than ever around the world are investing in themselves through health and wellness. And we sit in the middle of that from a product perspective. So our product is how we win every single day. And we've been consistent over a 25-year period to deliver performance products that are meaningful in people's lives.
Now, I want to get into your background, Dan, because I find it fascinating. But before I do, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't say, are you a runner yourself? What's your running routine?
Yeah. So in our company, we have two groups. There's runners, and then there's people that run. The runners, you can tell when you look at them, right? Maybe less than 5% body fat. I'm joking a bit, but
no, I think you're correct.
They're
serious.
They're dedicated runners. It's who they are. They define themselves as runners. And then there's people that run. I'm a person that runs. I joke that I think I was genetically engineered to plow a field and sit on a bar stool, but I love running. It's a part of my life. And I grew up in ball and bat sports, but running was central to every activity that I ever engaged in. And then when I got to Brooks 27 years ago, I became a runner because of the people that I was surrounded by and what it meant to me. We believe at Brooks that running is transformative in people's lives. It changes their lives.
The endorphins?
Yeah.
You still haven't given Kristen your running routine. You've gone from being a person who runs to a runner. Do you run every day?
I don't.
Okay.
Age caught me. And so I run a couple times a week. I'm now a yogi. I do a lot of yoga. I do 5-6 days a week of yoga.
Is there a shoe for that?
There is not. This is our problem. We can't solve that issue for
there are those ones that are very fitted to the foot.
Yeah, I haven't you don't slide off the mat.
Yeah, exactly.
We're not here to do product development for Dan Sheridan.
We'll tap into that if we have to.
Yeah, Dan, now you've been at Brooks for over 25 years, working your way up. Tell us about your journey and why you've stayed so long.
Yeah, so it's either a weird story to some people or a fun story. You can
weird and fun.
Yeah,
those are our two favorite things.
So I actually got out of college. I went to the University of Washington in Seattle, and I grew up in a family of 2 teachers. So I went into the family business and I taught high school and coached high school basketball straight out of college. I thought that's what I wanted to do. I was a high school basketball player, and I thought that was a great lifestyle for me. I didn't love the teaching. I was probably immature in my early 20s and found my way to Brooks through a friend that was working there. So I started in a very entry-level role called a tech rep. Tech reps are field reps. So we traveled around to all of our customers and we trained them on our products and our programs and ultimately tried to get them to pull the blue box out of the back to sell. And that job was confirmation for me that I loved this industry. I was a sneaker head growing up. I always loved sneakers, but I found myself loving the business. And I was lucky enough. Brooks was very, very small. When I started at Brooks, we were 50 employees. and about 50 million in global sales. We'll finish the year about 1.6 billion this year.
Wow.
1,300 employees, and so I was super lucky to start almost in a startup, right? It was a startup at that time, and then Jim Weber showed up in early 2000s, and he was a leader that I could tap into for career development, but he had a vision. He was an incredible leader. He was an even better person. And I was able to study under him, and my career kind of progressed through sales and marketing and then operations and general management. And I'm now very humbled by the role that I fill for Brooks.
So I want to go back to the tech rep days. I'm not a person who runs. I'm a person who swims, also not a shoe opportunity.
I swam growing up.
Right. And I think about can you unpack for me, like, what was it, let's start at the beginning, that made the running shoe so special? I mean, just give me a little bit of the technical details as to, because a little bit to me, a running shoe is a running shoe. Shame on me.
You,
yes, well,
How dare you? So this is a question I get all the time, right? And the truth about running is that it really matters to a runner on mile 22 at the marathon whether the shoe's going to work, right? And so what happens to runners is injury. Injury happens to every single runner. If you're doing something repetitiously, right, over and over again, it tends to end in injury. So early on in our journey, we tapped into that. How do we reduce injury in runners? So we've done 25 years of deep research on the biomechanics of human motion. We're science-based, and those studies help us develop R&D, innovation in materials, geometries in our shoe. And therefore, what we've done is we've got a model now where our consistency based in science, not in trend, like a lot of the market does, produces consistency in fit, feel, ride, and quality. And so our shoes over a 25-year period have been consistent in reducing injury, in making people more comfortable, and empowering their journey in fitness.
But can you say what it was at the Genesis back when it was 50? I feel a little bit like it's KFC special recipe, like I'll tell you. But was there a particular aspect that really differentiated from what else was in the market?
Yeah, I think so. A couple things. One, it's not, product is the number one reason that Brooks is where we are, but it's 100 things that matter in business for us to get there. So the very first thing that we identified is where runners are influenced into the sport of run. And that happens locally at your local shop, right? So we built our entire business model around independent running retailers because we knew that they were the best editors of the best brands and the best products in the world. And if we could get them to adopt our products and recommend them to runners, we were on to something. So we built our entire business model with this great product for the independent retailer. That looks like, inventory planning for an independent shop who doesn't have a big back room for inventory. So we had to stock all the inventory. We have not changed that model. And so what we do is we're able to service 10,000 points of retail around the world on a weekly basis. And many of the bigger brands just can't operationally do that. So we've created this supply chain and operations team to really execute at a local level. And then you match it with marketing, right? So running again is local. It's the authenticity of our brand that knows running and knows the run culture that really matters to a runner. You put on top of that our purpose of inspiring everyone to run and be active, which we live by every single day to get people moving. It's a perfect scenario in business. We're purpose-driven, we execute really well, and we've got a product that people want.
You're bringing me back. I'm getting some nostalgia about going with my mom to the local store in Connecticut, getting the shoes, trying them on, getting whatever that foot thing that you would slide.
The Brannick device.
There you go.
Yeah.
You're bringing nostalgia. And I think another reason that I think your brand is doing so well right now, in my opinion, is this nostalgia factor with younger generations who are kind of drawing themselves to these older brands, Brooks, New Balance, others, because they miss that kind of thing. talk to me about how you're kind of capturing a new generation of customers for such an old brand.
Yeah. We used to say that people aged into our brand. So stick with me on this one. When you got into your 30s, you had work, maybe you were starting a family, maybe your body was starting to finally speak to you, pain, ache, right, things like that. Your foot actually was hurting. They would find our brand because we had a solution for all of that. And what we're seeing now in the marketplace, we call it Generation Well. There's actually 4 generations for the first time, maybe ever, that are all focused on some similar trends in performance run or health and wellness. You've got boomers, you've got Gen X, you've got millennials and Gen Z. And all the survey data shows that all 4 of those generations are focused on some key health and wellness benefits. Longevity is a goal for them. Movement, physical movement, social connection, mental health. We know in Gen Z that 65% of Gen Zers on Strava say the reason that they're engaging in running right now is for mental health. That's never happened before.
Are there idiosyncrasies between the generations?
For sure.
I'm Gen X, millennial.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Frequency is one. How often you run is one. Social connection. So run clubs right now. I don't know, in your communities.
Big in New York, especially in the dating scene. Yeah.
So Gen Z, not only mental well-being, but social connection. And we think it's a push off of the COVID years, right? Of growing up, in your home with your parents and that connection that they want. We all can read the data on less drinking, less going to nightclubs or bars. And the social connection in run clubs now is the new dating app in our industry.
Well, as is Strava. You brought up Strava, which I think is like people are using that like Instagram now to like track each other's runs. I'm sure that certainly helped you too.
It is, and it's a bit of a social accountability for that generation to be accountable to your physical journey. And so, this generation, Gen Z right now, is engaging in running earlier than any other generation in the history of fitness. And we have data that shows, for Gen X, for millennials, for boomers, they started running when they got into high school, cross country and track. What we're seeing with Gen Z is they started at age 11. Because think about it, in COVID, you're at home, your parents are going out for a run or walk. So you're going to join just to get out of the house. And so we have a wave of a generation coming that we're pretty excited about. And we're seeing it around the world. We just launched in China. China's having a running boom like never before. I was there 2 weeks ago. We went for a run with a run club there called Dark Runner, and they run at night in Shanghai.
They run at night. Okay.
Yeah. And it's incredible. It's the universal truths of running, the transformative nature of run in people's lives is consistent in every market that we do business.
I'm just going to pause and just mention my family for a second as a slight divergence here, because my Gen Z kid was a big skateboarder.
Yeah.
And when you're talking, I think about the skate shops,
yep,
the shoe drops, and the lifestyle brand, right?
Yeah.
It was all about the sneaker app and such. How much of that, as you think about the lifestyle component, have you adopted any of the scarcity, for example, the collaborations, the things that also make people feel special, like they can't maybe get that particular pair that easily?
Yeah, I think so. Where I'll start with that is first and foremost, the running silhouette, the run shoe is now the choice for almost every fitness activity. This is why this tent is so big and we're going to expand our brand. Mm-hmm. So if you go to the gym right now, most people are in a running shoe. If you go for a walk, they're not necessarily in a walking shoe, they're in a running shoe, right? So the running silhouette in our industry right now is the choice for most people. There's a lifestyle component to this that has come out of COVID as well. The casualization in the workforce is great for our business,
sure,
right?
Yeah.
So I don't know how you guys are Monday through Friday, but I rarely have a leather shoe on. I'm wearing a bit of where I work, but
definitely more acceptable for you.
But you see it everywhere. Conferences this week at conferences, I saw more athletic footwear with suits than I've seen.
I know. I'm wearing a sneaker right now.
Right.
Yeah.
So then you take that trend, right? And our brand, it's pretty fun right now. So we just launched our lifestyle category. Brooks is 110 years old, right? One of the oldest sporting goods companies in the world. And we have a catalog of product that has authenticity in our heritage of run. So we're bringing that back. And the way you do that is exactly what you said, Diane. You do it through scarcity models to make sure that, one, your brand is in demand. You pick your distribution carefully, because sneakerheads want to be authentic. They want the special products, and we've been able to do that. We just did a drop with Jeff Staple in New York, who's a huge sneakerhead and an icon in the space. So we're bringing back lifestyle, and it's because people are asking us. They want our products not only on the run, but they want them off the run. They want this brand to be a bigger part of their life, and so we have permission to do that because of our history and the products that we can bring to market.
What part in your career did you realize you had the possibility of being CEO?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I've always wanted to be a leader. In every part of my journey in life, whether it was when I was competing in sports, I always wanted to be the captain of the team, and I was lucky to do that. In high school, I was always a leader in clubs and sports, and in college, I really knew that I wanted to lead something. My parents were leaders. They were community leaders. They were teachers. And so when I got to Brooks, I always knew that I wanted to lead.
Why? Why do you want to lead? Can we pause a second on that?
My wife would say I don't follow very well.
Okay, there's that.
So,
good to be self-aware.
I even in conferences, Diane, I sit and I think, okay, how could this be better, or what could I do to help, or things like that.
We'll continue that conversation off air.
And
very interesting.
No critique here. This was an unbelievable conference. You should both be very, very proud. But it's something inside of me that I just have always, leaned into. I'm fascinated by great leaders. I study great leaders. I read about great leaders. I want to be around them. So I knew early on that I wanted to lead something. I also know that I'm a team player, and I love building teams and being around great teams. And so over my years at Brooks, I always probably took more risk in my career to lead. I didn't know the function. I don't have a business degree. I have a sociology degree. And so
business of
people and strategy and connection and the like. And so I knew early on I wanted to lead. It was probably in the last 5 years where Jim and I really started to talk about this. And succession planning for any organization is critical. We've been succession planning at Brooks for over 10 years, all the way down to our senior leaders. And so, that's a critical part of my success story, is Jim had the vision to do a succession plan 5 years ago. He didn't anoint me or say you're the one, but he developed
You started getting invited to dinner once a week. You thought, no. I'm just kidding.
All right, well, I want to go back to the succession plan in a minute, but you mentioned there you took a lot of big risks, and I want to know what those were. What was your biggest risk that you took?
Yeah. So in 2019, we had a tragedy at Brooks. Our former COO passed away, and I was in a general management role of global sales. So I was leading our global businesses around the world. And Jim pulled me in and said, I think you can do this COO role. I had never led an operations team. I had never led an IT team. I had no official training in any of that. I grew up in this business, so I knew it really well. And that was the biggest risk. We opened a distribution center in the Midwest about 4 weeks after I became the COO, and it went completely sideways. We could not ship the volumes that we needed. And I was placed in this role, had no training in distribution, no training in operations. And what's always served me well is curiosity in solving problems and leaning on the experts around us, so that they can do the work and I can help and guide and support. So that was a big risk on the company's part and on my part in terms of the skills that were actually needed to do that job. I had incredible people around me. I lived in Indianapolis for some 30 weeks, getting that facility up and running. And now it's a world-class facility, and I'm super proud of all the work that the team has done. But that was a huge one.
That's a good one. And then how did you convince Jim that you were the one?
Oh, I don't know if it was convincing. I get asked all the time on advice of career development, right? And the truth is there's fortune in that, no pun intended here.
We'll take it.
There's a lot of luck. But I think, the hard work that goes into anyone's careers, you guys know that, is no accident. And I worked really hard to position myself with others to be in a spot where I was a choice, right? And so, it was 25 years of grinding and working and all the things that people do in their career to put myself in that position. And I don't apologize for that at all. I worked really hard at it.
Yeah, you wanted it, right?
I wanted it.
Well, you said you studied leadership, great leaders. I mean, talk about what struck you as you were doing your studying. Are there books that really you found particularly useful as a guide for where to go?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of books on leadership. I actually study mistakes a lot in leadership, and
what's your favorite mistake?
Yeah, I won't go. There's one that I think deeply about that I won't talk about because it's a competitive one. But what I watch in leadership,
now I'm guessing.
I know my mind is reeling.
With okay.
Yeah, here's some general themes that I think about in leadership mistakes. The first is not understanding the customer really well. And the customer can be very broad, maybe stakeholders, the right term, right? I think of our stakeholders as first and foremost, our end consumer, our owner, right? Our employees, and then the direct teams that I manage. And what I've watched over time is when people lose sight of those stakeholders and it becomes about an individual. And so we have a saying that was brought to us by Charlie Munger at Berkshire Hathaway.
Very funny guy,
very, incredibly intelligent. And he talks a lot about organizations avoiding the ABCs: arrogance, bureaucracy, and complacency. And I think in leadership, it's just a good guide and a mental model that I always follow. I approach things with low arrogance because I don't know everything. So I'm super curious in how I approach people. Bureaucracy, I often say I'm allergic to bureaucracy. Even in nonprofits or school committees that I'm asked to be on, my first question is there a lot of bureaucracy in this organization? I can't function in that. I don't know how to function in it. And so Brooks is a place where there's low bureaucracy. And complacency is interesting, right? I think every organization can rest on your history and we're not immune to that at Brooks. We're the number one brand in the US and in Germany now, but really in every other market, we've got a lot of room to grow. So we're not complacent
That's what Jim Collins says, right? It's doing the right thing for too long, or somebody said that. I think of ABC as always be closing.
Yes,
so there you go.
Another
Glenn Ross.
You also mentioned
always
leadership.
Be cobbling as well.
For shoes.
Yeah.
You mentioned leadership. You just mentioned Berkshire Hathaway. So I think we have to ask the natural question, which is Warren Buffett. I'm assuming you've met him, Dan. Talk to us about that, meeting him, any advice he's given you, what that's like.
Yeah, I say this, we're so fortunate. Our ownership structure may be the greatest in the world, right? We're owned by who I would call the goat of capitalism, Warren Buffett. And I have had the chance to meet him over the years. We were at Berkshire's shareholder meeting about a month ago, and Warren was there, and obviously he came by. Swan song. It was a mic drop. And so, I reflect back in 2014, he came to Seattle to meet with all of our employees. We were celebrating Brooks' 100-year anniversary. And he said one thing that has just stuck with me ever since. He said, Berkshire focuses on the long term, and your jobs are simply this: to make sure the brand is stronger at the end of the year than it was at the beginning. And, at that time I was young and thinking, okay, what does that mean for me in my role? But, it's the truth is that's a huge thing for us to do. You have to do 1,000 things to keep your brand strong. You have to create great product. You have to keep your morale and your culture going. You have to keep your customers happy, right? But for me in my leadership role, that's how I think about it. Is our brand strengthening every season in every market? And it takes investment, takes really hard decisions. It takes talent, capability, new technology, and the like. And so his wisdom there is something that, I think deeply about as I make decisions for this brand.
You're so optimistic, and I love that about you, Dan. But I'm wondering,
I think leaders have to be optimistic. Why would you follow anyone that's not?
I love that, because you always come in and meet us with a smile, which is so great. But I'm wondering, because we're all human, and I'm this way too, even though I have a resting smile face. Was there ever a time where you felt like quitting, where you're just like, you know what, I've had it, this is enough?
Oh, of course, I use the 80-20 rule this way. And I tell young people at Brooks that, look, we're not perfect. Brooks isn't perfect. No organization is. We've got our warts and bruises and things like that. And so, for me, 80%, this is my framework. 80% of the time, I love what I'm doing. 20%, there's things that drive you nuts and things you can't solve. And so if that ever got out of whack for me in my daily job, I would, probably have a bad day and reevaluate either how I was showing up or the teams or problems I was solving. So you're never in a 100%, kind of stasis. So for me, I'm always balancing that and trying to keep my head straight on, okay, what's real in that 20%? What have I created in my head that's not real? And I'll say it again. I just think as leaders, you have to be optimistic. You have to have a winning attitude. Otherwise, no one's going to follow you. Your customers aren't going to follow you. Your employees aren't going to follow you. And your owners are probably going to scratch their head and say, what's going on here?
Well, I think about two things I bonded. I don't know Warren Buffett that well, but I've interviewed him. One was his favorite book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. Chapter 7, as Kristen knows, make the other guy think it's his idea. But also when his daughter-in-law was using the Buffett last name to sell investment books. And it was about authenticity. It was about earning it. And I wonder, this next generation of leaders, we talk about new skill sets. There's the stuff that's classic that you've talked about. What do you think changes now in terms of, do you hire differently? Do you build your career differently? And if you were starting out now, do you think you would do things differently to get to where you want to be?
Well, I think the landscape now, right, with remote work and a new generation that is challenging how we grew up in the workforce and is really having us think about the work environment and career development attached to that.
Do you have a remote work?
We do. So we're 3 days a week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and we have kind of flexible days on Monday and Friday. The truth is we build products, so people have to be together to do that. So the majority of our employees are in office, call it 4.5 days a week. But we have a flexible work environment. And so I think about this next generation. I have a daughter who just graduated from high school, headed off to business school. And we talk about this, like the workforce. And I just believe that proximity to leaders really matters in your career development. And I'm a product of that.
Role models.
Yeah. And being in the hallways or being in meetings where really hard problems are discussed and absorbing that and seeing how people negotiate and talk through and debate in meetings is super important. So we're trying to foster that in our workforce and in our physical spaces at Brooks. So we just opened a second building in our Seattle campus. And the concept was very big open spaces for connectivity and places for people to share. And so, this next generation of workers, they have huge goals in their career and ambitions. And what we're trying to do is foster a place where proximity matters to the work. Doesn't mean we don't have remote work and tools to do that. But for me, I want to be a leader that empowers people to be together. I think it's super important. Relationships matter in business and in life. And Brooks is a place where relationships matter.
I'm sure you get a lot of customer stories being thrown your way, whether you want them or not.
I do.
But I'm curious, what's the most unique or unusual piece of feedback you've gotten from a customer, and did it lead to any sort of big change?
We have an engaged customer base because the journey of health and wellness matters. We had a story of a lady that wrote us a story that she said her daily run is a gift from her to her, right? It's her gift of time to just step out of her crazy life and go for a run. And so we get all these inspiring stories.
She wasn't complaining about the shoe. She was just, thanks for the shoe.
She was, because, at the root of it, what we do is we empower people to have maybe the best part of their day, which is activity. But we get a lot of inspiring stories of how we've changed people's lives in changing their wellness journey, weight loss, cardiac disease, things like that. And so those are the ones that I obviously I just treasure because we're changing people's lives. We get a lot of product feedback.
Yeah. What do people say about that?
I mean, we get product ideas of innovation in product. We get a lot of critiques on our product, right? We get a lot on color and material and trend. And so, we take those. I probably get 3 a day that come straight to me. And those are important for us. For me, I said at the conference here, one of the things that I think a lot about in my role is keeping my head above the clouds to see the future, but staying grounded enough in the dirt and the mud to know what's going on.
Makes you a very tall person,
yeah,
Dan.
It's hard.
I want to, no, I'm not going to be a curmudgeon here, but one of the things I think is interesting is as technology has developed for shoes, we've seen athletic products that almost go too far. They enhance too much to the point where the bodies go, whoa, hold on a second. That's just too good a shoe. Have you had that problem? I'm kind of curious what you say no to.
Yeah, this is a great question. I mean, so, we have a robust R&D and innovation process at Brooks. And in footwear, you're 24 months out from product. And in R&D, you're 36, 48 months sometimes from your R&D and innovation cycles, right? So you're really far from the market in terms of developing and designing and then producing and getting to market. And so we had some failures for sure. A lot of ours, though, we're either too early for the trend. So our team really is studying the insights of runners and then the science piece. And, a lot of times we'll be early and the product won't sell really well and it'll take 6, 12 months and then it'll take off. And so we've been lucky because I think we're based in science. That has helped us in limiting the mistakes that we make.
Can you talk about one of those biggest failures? Because I think it also is super helpful, like you said, for people to learn from mistakes and failures and figure out what they could do better.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of examples in our journey. Maybe one where we were late. We were late to a party. If you remember the barefoot phenomenon in the industry,
those are some of the ugliest shoes.
Well,
I'm sorry,
we
have
would,
some
we
and
would
they
agree.
sell well.
We would agree,
right.
but this was a time in our industry where there was a debate whether the shoe was bad. That was a scary moment for us that we were in the shoe business.
Keto diet. We were all trying to go back to our Neanderthal days. Yeah.
So we had this moment at Brooks where maybe our R&D was a little slow in really seeing what was in market, this barefoot phenomenon. And so we did a hurry up offense to get sharp and smart on what is that insight that people are buying these shoes. They're saying, I don't want a shoe anymore. I want to feel the ground. I want to be in my bare feet.
What was the insight?
So the insight was this, that people actually want experience in their run. And we were in a very prescriptive moment in running where you would go into a running store and you either pronated or supinated. And so we were prescribing a shoe to you based on how you looked on a treadmill. The insight was that people actually wanted either to feel far from the ground or really close to the ground. And so we developed a whole line of shoes called the Pure Project, which was based on feel. It was based on your experience in your run. Some days you want a really cushy ride.
Wait, this is a failure story?
No, this is one where we were late. We were late.
Yeah. Okay.
We failed in seeing the insight in the market. And so we developed a line of shoes that had the most cushion and the closest to the ground, and it was a home run for us. We nailed the market, and furthermore, it helped our R&D and the like. Some of the mistakes we make are more on kind of not predicting the trend correctly, and so we'll develop shoes maybe that on the trail or on the road that just missed the trend. And we've had those over the years as well.
The trend being, so I've noticed, especially with a lot of your competitors, this huge push into like fashion and athleisure. Is that something that you want to pursue too? Or what do you think about others doing that?
Yeah, so I think we do. We want to be in the life of a runner. And so that's on and off the run.
A celebrity runner who likes rhinestone running shoes. What does lifestyle mean?
And celebrity runners aren't bad. You know, we just did an activation with Jeremy Renner in 2024 and have a great relationship with Jeremy Renner. Patrick Schwarzenegger is an influence of ours on White Lotus.
Buzzy right now. So, that's a good one to be involved with.
You know, running is important in everybody's life that has an active life. And so we're tapping into the cultural moments to do that. You know, the truth is our brand has permission to play in trend, but we're going to root it in performance. Performance is going to be, you know, our North Star. And then off of that, because what you're seeing in the market right now, look at every major professional sports league. It's a runway now when they show up to the locker room. That is a trend that has athletics, has performance products at the center of it. On Vogue magazine, we counted, I think there were 4 months in a row where it was an athlete that was on the
Do you look at that and think dumb money, given the amount of money some of your competitors spend for endorsements? Or
well, I think for Brooks, we're going to be very intentional in who we partner with and how we partner. You know, we don't necessarily chase trends. I call them jet streams. And, you know, they're tailwinds. You got to jump on them when you can clearly define them, see how they connect to your brand. But we're going to do it through a performance lens every time because we're a performance product company. And that's important to our point of view.
I do have a bit of a newsy question for you, Dan, because I know you mentioned going to China and Singapore. I know a lot of your production is overseas. How are you feeling right now? Are you considering moving production to the U.S. or how are you looking at this current climate?
Yeah, it's what a tricky time it is to be in business and to have your manufacturing in Southeast Asia. So, you know, Brooks has been manufactured in Southeast Asia for the last 30 years, really. We're mostly in Vietnam and Indonesia.
You really got dinged in Vietnam. Then.
Yeah. So the truth about athletic footwear and footwear in general, 99% of the footwear that's sold here in the U.S. comes from Southeast Asia. 56 to 60% comes out of China. We're outside of China. So we're a bit fortunate in the standpoint of we're not manufacturing in China. But in 1930, the Smoot-Hawley Act, implemented footwear tariffs on imports into the U.S. And we already had high tariffs. We had 20% tariffs out of Vietnam already. So now we're in a pause kind of hold where we have an additional 10% on top of that. And that's a math problem. It's a math problem for every business that manufactures out of Southeast Asia. So our plan, and we had been working on this before the election because we knew that something was coming. And we implemented that plan on day one of Liberation Day to go to work on the entire supply chain. And what we didn't want to do is penalize the consumer. And
how much have you raised prices?
About 3% on select styles, not across all of our styles. And what we were able to do is work with our entire supply chain to optimize cost and efficiency and process to get some of the other margin back in a smart way. And so we're positioned really well. We launched it to our retailers, a couple of weeks after Liberation Day, and that landed really well with our customers.
Liberation Day sounds so benevolent.
Maybe, I'm smiling.
I was going to say.
I'm smiling.
Gulf of America, Liberation Day. Enough said. Enough said about that, I guess.
Yeah.
You make it sound easy, and obviously there's a lot of hard choices. talk about this juncture right now. What are some of the toughest choices you have to make? Pricing, of course, is one in an uncertain environment, but give me some sense of what gives you pause where you think there's not an easy way forward.
Boy, how much time do we have?
We have hours for
yes.
you.
Look, I think the uncertainty around the world for global trade is something we think deeply about. We're a global company.
In terms of reaching consumer markets?
Yeah, and just disruption in global trade. Everyone knows that we not everyone knows. We know that free trade is a place where we would love to be. But that's not reality right now. So I think a lot about just global trade and how it will disrupt our businesses and our markets that we're investing in, specifically in China and Southeast Asia for us. If there's a disruption in the South China Sea, that's not going to be great for the sporting goods industry, to say the least. And then there's a lot of things that I think about in terms of investments, right? We'll do about 1.6 billion this year in global sales. We're not the biggest in our industry. We'd like to say we're the most relevant in our industry. And so our dollars have to stretch. Our marketing dollars have to stretch. Our investment in technology has to stretch. The disruption that is absolutely coming in technology and AI is a place that we're spending a lot of time on right now as an organization. And this week was great for me to have perspective on other companies and how they're dealing with it. So I think a lot about that. I think about, growth. My job is Chief Growth Officer. And so where we grow and how we grow, while strengthening the brand really matters. We're not going to be a brand that goes down market, down channel with our brand. We're going to stay premium. And so that opens up different markets for us. I said Southeast Asia, but Europe, we're pushing into Europe. We're pushing into the Middle East because running is central in all these markets. And so spend a lot of time on that. And then as you get bigger, keeping your culture with you as you grow is super hard. This company was built as a purpose-driven brand. We still are. We want to inspire everyone to get up and run in the morning or walk or go to the gym. And so having that as your fine point to drive your culture through value sets that everybody understands and is consistent with is another really hard one for us to keep in front of our employees as we continue to add more teammates to this team.
Whenever I finish a conference or a trip with friends, we play the rose and thorn game where we do the best thing, the worst thing. I want to ask you, Dan, because you're a little over a year into the job, what was your low and your high, or your rose and your thorn from this past year?
Well, I think my high is just recognizing what an opportunity this is. I'm humbled by this opportunity. To say that I'm proud is an understatement. I'm super proud of where Brooks has been and where we are now, and that I'm one of many people leading it, but in this seat. So that's probably my rose, just pride in a company that I care deeply about, and an employee base and customer base that I care deeply about. Oh, the thorns.
That's a hard one. I know.
It is a hard one. I think the tariff announcement was rocked us a bit.
Sure.
When that announcement came out, it was a 46% on top of the 20%. So you can imagine the math problem that we were trying to solve.
Pretty big thorn.
Yeah. But on the other side of that was this group of people that just came together and we solved it. We haven't, necessarily executed everything yet, but we had a plan. We knew exactly what we wanted to do. So that was a really hard moment. I think all the other, policy changes with the US president and everything that's coming out is really hard as leaders to say, okay, what's real, what's not, what do we pay attention to as a brand and a leadership team that has to lead a group. And so those were hard moments to say, okay, where do we stand? And, at Brooks, we root in our values, and we stand like rocks when it comes to our values, and we adjust and do all the things you have to do to adapt. But because we're a purpose-driven brand that has clearly defined values, we lean into those in those thorny times.
I want to, before we go, stick with the global landscape a second, because one of my favorite stories was when Swiffer went to Italy. They took all the value proposition of the Swiffer and upended it. They made it a scrub brush with granules, because Italian women looked at the Swiffer and said, I don't think so. They wanted to get down on their, and scrub their floors. When you look at these different markets, are there cultural idiosyncrasies? You're a student of sociology. Do you sell differently? Can you give us, are there idiosyncratic taste differences that you've noticed that you think are interesting? No judgments, but just anecdotal?
Yeah, absolutely. We say think global, act local.
So what are some of the ones that struck you as different?
Take product specifically, right? We know that actually the biomechanics of human motion are borderless.
Right. Humans are humans.
Humans are humans.
But human tastes are different.
So we have that. But what people want and how they connect to product emotionally is different in every country. And so what we've had to do is really think about our global approach to
Can you give us an example?
Yeah. So take a product where we're designing, developing, materializing, coloring out of Seattle, Washington. And we bring that over to a European market and we put it on the table. They look at us like we have 4 heads. Like, that's not going to work here. And so it's this negotiation that happens between a global line and how you actually assort merchandise and color your line locally. It really matters.
What are Europeans like versus Americans right now?
So if you go into a general sporting goods in the US, you're going to see a pretty traditional shoe wall where you've got black on black, black on white,
red,
dark navies, right? Maybe some more kind of floral colors and things like that to sprinkle in. In Europe, it's less about these basic colors and more about kind of how you stand out. And so performance, right, is how they look at a performance brand. So performance colorways are super important.
Neon yellow.
Yeah, things like that. They matter in those markets. In China and actually in Southeast Asia, Japan specifically is really about, they assort the wall in terms of the time that you're going to run in a marathon. So this shoe is for a sub 3 hour. This is for a sub 4 hour. In the US, we assort it by cushion, stability.
Right. Is that a real science? That sounds like sort it by sub 3 hour because...
Well, it's the way the consumer thinks about the sport, right? So all those are real in product. And then there's nuances in community and where they shop, right? And how they consume information that's very different in every single market. And, there's some similarities too. Online is still pretty universal for research and product discovery. And so having robust ways for people to consume your information online, social and social commerce is way ahead in Southeast Asia than it is here or in Europe.
Sure.
So we got to nuance that as we go,
WeChat,
global. Influencers are different. And who you tap into is much different in every market. But you come back to the universal truths of running. And that's why this brand can expand, because runners are choosing this activity because it's important in their life. And we know that because we're at the center of the run culture.
Well, thank you for joining us and
thank you
for
guys.
being here
Keep
for these
running.
2 days.
What's your best time?
Oh, the guys and gals back at the office will laugh. But when I was in my late 20s, I did a half marathon under an hour 30, which for me was really
Is that good? As a non-runner, I actually have no idea.
It was good for an Irishman that sits on a bar stool and plows a field. So
okay, all right.
So I was
done, you.
I was quick-ish.
Yeah. And quickish is where you want to be. That's where I want to be.
That's
yeah.
right.
Great. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks.
And thanks for coming to our
Thanks
summit.
to Fortune for doing this.